We are recording this. We will not be here long. And so, but when we're done, Jaden, I'd like you to stay on, and I would like us to schedule our statistics time.
Yeah, I emailed you. I wasn't sure.
Yep. Not a problem at all. Okay, so we're heading into, let's get right to it. We're heading into, we just got done the eye and looking at the functions of the eye, and in my opinion, fairly miraculous systems. And we're going to look at the other sensory systems. We're going to find them equally impressive, I hope. And so as I share the course book with you, it starts off, we talk about the neuroanatomy of music. As you both know, I'm a musician, and you're probably musicians as well, and music lovers. And our brain has actually evolved to hear music. Specifically, the parts of the brain associated with understanding language and the parts of the brain understanding music are different parts. And we're able to distinguish them. One of the really cool things, I'm not sure if it ever made it into my actual notes, but I know in the book, it went into the notion that no matter what the genre of music is, our brains, a universal capability that we have is the ability to recognize music as opposed to natural sounds and as opposed to people talking. And that is a cultural universal. So even if you grew up listening to music all the time, or you lived in an area that didn't even have, well, there's no area that doesn't have music. Every culture has a music tradition. But we're able to distinguish that even from another culture. If we heard something from the deep Amazon jungle, we would be able to distinguish when people are talking and just communicating, and we'd be able to we would know when they're doing something musical. We might not like it, but we know it's music. And so so that's built into the brain. And in fact, not to keep throwing darts at evolution, but this was in our brain, and it was recognized in our brain before there was any sort of formal music in cultures, in ancient like prehistoric cultures, before there was actually sort of any evidence that there was music going on, the brain was already ready for it. So that kind of tells us a little bit about, well, how did that come about when there was no sort of selection from the environment saying, brains that understand music are going to do better than brains that don't understand music. So, and we see here in this graphic, again, reiterating, and you're going to see when we look at the pathways for each one of the senses and whatnot, and the pathways for everything that we're going to be talking about in this class, that it's extremely unlikely that we don't pretty much involve the whole brain in almost every one of our experiences. So here we see different parts of the brain that have been labeled associated with the processing of music and the experience of music. Once again, nail in the coffin to the we only use 10% of our brain. That really is not true. We use our entire brain, and it enriches our experience. So you look at some of these things, when you're listening to music, let's say, and you're tapping your foot, and the motor coordination kind of gets in line with that rhythm and meter that you're having. We have the tactile feels of the instrument, let's say, the ability. There's something that's happening to me. Just I'll use a couple of my own incidentals here in this class, but something that's happening to me is my primary instrument is bass. And the new guitar that I have is I've always played a fretless bass. So if are you familiar with guitars, and they have the metal guitars? Oh, I'll just teach you about this. What the heck? Okay. Bass guitar number 1. Notice that along the neck, there's these metal bars. And those metal bars, in terms of the strings, when you pluck a string on a guitar, this is vibrating. It's probably not tuned right now, but this is vibrating at a note that we call E, which is 2 octaves below middle C on a piano. So that's an E. And if the halfway point is called the primary harmonic, and it is also an E. So 12 frets up, 12 notes in the scale, 12 notes in the polyphonic scale. So from E to F sharp, to G, to A flat, A, B flat, B, all the way up to E again. And each one of these frets marks a place in which where the exact note, the exact harmonic of that string is. So if I am 5 half notes up from E and I fret right there, that's an A. And the vibration of the string is a higher pitch than the fundamental E. Now frets mark these out very clearly. So I can press my finger anywhere inside of in between the frets, and the fret defines the point at which contact is made and the harmonic is there. Now, this is my pride and joy. No frets. What this means, I'm not sure if you can hear this, but it has no dee 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 dee. It has no, so the player has to be, my finger has to hit exactly where that fret would have been, otherwise it's a little off. Okay, now my point is, as I'm learning to play an instrument that doesn't give me the same visual, I've always played a fretless, but this one doesn't give me as many visual references as the other bass that I had, that had lines painted on them. But over time, my arm is learning the angle. So I compressed, I didn't look, and I put that is right on a D. That's a 2nd string, 5th fret. And my arm has learned, just like a violinist and a cello player learns to play those notes, and you actually gain a sense of the angle of your arm, the feeling of the strings, the tension of the strings. Of course, it takes a lot of practice, but to be able to actually play the instrument. So you can see how much the body is involved, how much the brain motor cortex coordinating with the ear, so that if I press that D right there, not only, I missed it that time, but if I press that D note, my brain is constantly listening to the note to make sure it's right on where it is and making tiny, minute adjustments as I'm reaching my hand for where I want it to go. And then there's that feedback loop that comes back and say, yeah, I got the D, or I didn't get the D, and I can hear that the note is off. And so it's the ways in which our miraculous brains are piecing all this information together simply to play a note on an instrument, and to play a note on the instrument without looking. So, and that's, or while you're doing something else. I'm certainly not as skilled as the other players in my band, but they can do intricate guitar and piano work and sing at the same time, where the automaticness of their hands doing, in fact, they are thinking about both things at the same time, and they're able to do that. So just a really, really sort of amazing processes that happen across the brain. So when we were talking about the eye and the vision system, we talked about a transduction of an energy, and that energy was the visual electromagnetic field that our nerves in our retina were particularly aligned with. And now we're looking at different kinds of energies. One is mechanical, And the other one, and then there's energy in the form of heat or the absence of heat. There's no such thing as cold. That's a physics thing. There's no such thing as cold. There's just heat and the absence of heat. And we experience cold as the absence of heat. So it's not that you let the cold in, it's that you let the heat out. And then the chemical senses, which are involved in terms of our sense of smell and sense of taste. And this is not even getting into some of those other senses, like when we can sense an electromagnetic field, like we can sense static. When that's when you put on a sweater, that's right out of the dryer, and you not only can you hear it, but you can actually feel it on your skin and you sense that different than you would the sense of touch. Okay, so that's a lot of this chapter is about. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit because this is one of our labs, is to take a look at this tool right here. An oscilloscope is a tool that measures the wavelength, and that, well, it gives you a visual graphic representation of sound as we actually know in terms of amplitude, okay, and pitch. Those two dimensions will determine how that waveform looks. And when we're looking at complex sounds like the human voice, or sounds like a trumpet or something, you'll see that it's not just a single tone. It's a mashing together of tones. In fact, in the music world, when we're looking at an instrument has what we call a timbre. And the timbre is what gives a note, let's say an E flat, it gives a note its characteristic that makes it an E flat on a harp, or an E flat on a piano, or an E flat in a saxophone. And it's the timbre, which is all the overtones, all of the vibrations that are coming off in the sake of let's say for a saxophone. A saxophone is just basically a metal tube with holes in it that interrupt those waveforms in certain ways in order to produce certain pitches. But the primary vibration is coming from a wooden reed that is in the mouthpiece. And when you're blowing into the mouthpiece, that it vibrates like a whistle, like the piece of a whistle, and it just vibrates, and that's sending the vibrations through a metal tube. That's obviously a complex one, and all those levers and whatnot that are there to have holes in all sorts of different places, to nuances and the way, and the actual, what they call embouchure, which is the ability for the trumpet player to squeeze down with their lips in order to tighten the tension on the reed itself in order to produce what are called grace notes, which are slight, like they'll just go like a little higher kind of thing. They're just like squeezing it, like almost like you'll see them physically move like they're squeezing something out, and they're using that tension in their lips. The trumpet players are also famous for that, the tension in their lips. To the point that many trumpet players will actually end up with, they sort of have a circle on their lips of muscle that has been, like, they're all bulked up with the muscle that's around there. They're like muscle bodybuilders, just like they have popping muscles in their lips. But anyway, we have the oscilloscope here, and the first sense that we're looking at, and it's extremely important for me, and obviously I've been talking about music all this time, but I'm also deaf. And so understanding how we hear and what goes on in my particular ears has been an interesting sort of experience. Now, what I want to point out to you is you have the structure of the ear. And this is all from your basic biology class. You have the outer ear, this cartilage piece. Over here, there's no bones in that. It's all cartilage. This is the most shark-like component of our body. This is the material that sharks are made out of, is this cartilage. And then we have the ear canal going into the eardrum, and then the bones that connect the eardrum to the oval window, which vibrates the fluid inside the cochlea. And we move to that next image to get a vision of what the cochlea looks like, this spiral of nervous tissue. Now, just to take a little side note to understand the grand interconnectedness of things, is the spiral of the cochlea, along with many spirals in the natural world, is actually based on a mathematical formula that has been identified as, has everybody, raise your hands if you've heard of pi. Like, the pi times the, 2 times the radius pi is the circumference of a circle, that 3.14 thing. There's another one called phi. Now, phi is referred to as, we have the best color. This is a great color for this lecture because it's referred to as the golden proportion. And here we are, all gold. And so the golden proportions are, well, let's just look at it from scale. This spiral is a logarithmic portion of one to the other. Has anybody ever seen the movie The Da Vinci Code? Anybody? No?
I've heard of it. I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's a
or
great
maybe
movie.
I have, but I don't remember it.
It's a great movie, and one of the clues that Tom's, I was gonna say Tom Selleck, no, different guy, the other guy. One of the ones that he solves is a sequence of numbers noted as the Fibonacci sequence, which is numbers that are in the phi ratio to each other, and they're pretty easy to think about. You start with 1, you add another 1, then 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 9, 8, and it goes up, and the number starts to go up like this. Okay, it forms a logarithmic, and the true 3-dimensional space rendition of that number is the spiral. The spiral that is in our ear is in the same proportion as the spiral of the galaxy of the Milky Way. It is the same proportion of the spiral when you flush your toilet, when the water goes down. When a dog walks in a circle, it walks into a proportionally tighter circle until it sits down. That is by that same proportion. And if you look at a nautilus shell, it's the famous nautilus shell with the proportions, all the same thing. So these proportions replicate in the natural world all the time. And here we are with our cochlea. And what I want you to notice is, as we go along here, you'll notice that there's a sequence of notes or frequencies that we see as they go in, and the frequencies become lower and lower. Low frequencies travel further in liquid. We know this because whales, well, we know this because we measured it, but we know that whales who had to talk with their buddies all around the world speak or sing in such a low tone that we can't hear them with the naked ear, but they can travel around the globe. So you can have whales talking to each other. One's in the Indian Ocean, one is in the North Atlantic, and they're carrying on a conversation. We don't know what they're saying, but they're carrying on a conversation because that low frequency. So our ears are built the same way. By the way, the fluid inside the cochlea has the same mineral and salt content as the ocean. It just gets cooler and cooler, doesn't it? We're all like, and so we have this fluid in there, and there are tiny hair cells that are responsive to different frequencies. And as the sound washes over, starts vibrating through that fluid around that cochlea in that spiral, they react. There's certain ones that are going, okay, I'm looking for 5,000 hertz. That's pretty high. And then the other one's looking for 600 hertz. That's really low. And so, and that's the number of cycles per second. So 5,000 hertz is 5,000 cycles per second. And so that's, you know, how many ups and downs, like in a wave, it's from one even point all the way up and then all the way back to the beginning point. One full cycle, there are 5,000 of them, and the nerve cells are sensitive to 5,000. Now you can actually map out a piano. The pianos on the 88 key pianos, they go from notes. There's notes in between. Now you have two white notes next to each other, a half step in the scale. There's notes in between those. They're not familiar to us because our Western music ideal is based on the Western scale. That's what we're used to. That's why Japanese music sounds so weird. If you're listening to Japanese, it has this doing, you know, like that there, because it's, to us, it's like, tune that thing. Geez, it's out of tune. It sounds really, but our ears are not conditioned to recognize. We know it's music. Back to my original point, we know it's music, but our ears are not really conditioned to hearing those as melodies that go together with harmony, the way Western music has been developed. And but you can map the piano keys across here from high notes all the way to low notes. Now, in my particular area of deafness, the reason why I can play music is because I don't have any deafness in the deep part of my cochlea. So from the apex, see at the end, it's right in the middle of that graphic, all the way back to 800, 1,000, well, yeah, to 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000. I can hear those. I can hear low notes, hence the bass. I can hear bass notes very easily, just like anybody else can. I don't need them to be amplified unreasonably. However, when I was 13 years old, I was living in the island of Guam, and I was a scuba diver, which was very cool because it's a very nice place to be a scuba diver. And there was one time that I was, as you go down into the ocean, let's go back to the graphic of the ear here. When you go down, every 15 feet or so, you are adding what's called an atmosphere or pressure, which is how much pressure the molecules outside of you are pressing in the outside. So as you're going deeper, you get multiples of atmospheres put upon you. So basically you don't feel it like you're being squeezed, but the pressure is there. Now what you see is there's a barrier. Like, do you see my mouse moving? The outer pressure here of the water I was in, I was at about 120 feet down. The outer pressure here was about 15 or so atmospheres, 15 times the pressure was on the inside of my ear. So there's pressure coming on. The molecules of water are pressing against here at 15 times the pressure of what's inside. Now, just to give you a kind of a sense of that, if you had a boiler, and I just learned this myself because I helped a fellow faculty member put a boiler class together on Brightspace. If you have a boiler that's at 15 pounds of pressure and it explodes, it'll take off half your house. The pressure that was on my ear was much more than that. Now, what you do, you see this eustachian tube right here. As the pressure builds up here, what divers will do is they will equalize. Those eustachian tubes go into my throat. And that's why when you have a cold and you're all congested, the eustachian tubes get all filled with crap and you can't hear well. because they all get filled with that. Well, when you're scuba diving, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to block your nose and you're supposed to breathe air through the eustachian tubes in order to equalize the pressure on both sides of the eardrum. Okay, so I'm actually just forcing air into there to kind of, so, you know, as the pressure is pushing it like this, I'm backfilling this air-filled cavity that's on the inside after my eardrum. Now, being the reckless youth that I was, I neglected doing that, and I felt a lot of pressure on it was painful. And I went to equalize, and when I equalized, it was in a lot of pain, and I blew really hard into my eustachian tubes, and there was a snapping sound, and I went completely deaf. And came out of the water after that, and I was, you're underwater, you don't hear that well anyway, but I came up after the water, and I just felt like I had water in my ears or something like that. And then, my hearing started to come back and whatnot. But my current audiologist feels that what I did, in all actuality, by forcing the air up there and creating such a kind of a little explosion in there, a little explosion of pressure, I damaged the neurons on just the beginning of the inside of this, and took out all these high frequency. From that point on, I always had trouble hearing language. Now, in anthropology, boy, I'm going all over the place here. I feel good today. This is good. In anthropology, you're probably like, just get to the point, Mark. I want to know other labs. But in anthropology, we hear about sounds having meaning. And one of the most significant sounds is what they refer to as the ohm, which is it's a vowel sound, a full kind of, just like it says, ohm, sounds very full. It's very low tone, very low, and very deep in the cochlea that we hear that. And those vowel tones are in almost every culture the name of the deity, the god of that culture, has an ohm sound in. So God and Allah and just Muhammad, those kinds of things, they all have those kind of ohm sounds, very easy to translate. Other parts of language have very high pitched, like the sound that distinguishes a T from a P. T and P, those little sounds between T and P, or the CH sound or the TH sound, that have these like kind of little, almost scratchy sounds. They're very fast, very, very high pitched. And they allow us to distinguish, if you look at the way words are structured, we have consonants, T's, P's, Q's, K's, those kind of sharp, intermersed with vowel sounds like A, I, E, O, and U. What my disability is an inability to distinguish T's from P's and Q's from K's and that kind of thing. So my deafness is of voice, of language, is what I have a hard time hearing. So I'm actually wearing the shirt from my band. That's what just happened to have it here. And in my band, I've been playing with them for 22 years. And except for the occasions where I've actually looked them up, I am 15 feet at the most from Gerald, who's playing on piano, and he plays the Elton John character, and he's belting out these songs magnificently. And I still don't know any of the lyrics because I just don't hear enough definition of the sounds. Even with my hearing aids, they're still very, very difficult. I was involved in a test once, very early, way before I even considered, the technology wasn't even available for the hearing aids that I have now, which zero in on that one area of my deafness. There's one time I was at a Miracle Ear at the mall getting tested, and my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, was out in the hallway. I'm in the booth with the headphones on, and they're cranking this up to see if I can hear these notes, and Katie could hear them, and I couldn't. And I'm in a silent booth with the headphones on. It's like, and they're waiting for me to point to my ear, right? And I'm like, nothing. So the hearing aids that I have, what they actually do, and I have to be careful about this when I'm tuning instruments, is they actually sample those notes. There's no level of amplification that will that will activate those nerves anymore. They're completely dead. So it samples those notes and it retunes them to another area in my hearing that I do. So it'll take that high T sound and it does something to it. So it's in the more 4,000, 3,000 hertz area. And at least it's there. It's not as sharp. It's not as still. So that's why hearing aids are not like glasses. Not everything's sharp. Things get, and I hear things differently than people do. It's not noticeable anymore, but it was certainly noticeable the first time I put them on, that things sounded different. And I tried to tune a guitar and it was really, really funny because it was just going all over the place. So I have to use a mechanical tuner. So that's a little bit about kind of the connection between the shape of the cochlea. You can path language, you can mark language, what letters are represented along the cochlea, the notes of the piano and all that stuff, and the ones that have been emphasized and are much better at picking up notes so that you can recognize Western music and when something's out of tune and you recognize that it's out of tune. Even non-musicians, if you play them notes that are like, say on the oscilloscope, they're very close, they'll tend to say, well, that's the right one and it's the one that's closer to Western music. So like the note A is at 440 cycles per second. It's called A440. And that's the note that we base. So A440 is like, it's probably right around there. The cochlea, 440 cycles per second. So, all right. So just like in the pathway for understanding where things are in our visual field, we have a pathway for our auditory field. And the really kind of thing, this is where we're sort of like a chameleon. And if you've ever seen, you ever see a chameleon? The ones that kind of like, they're kind of going along like that, and they have those like socket eyes on both sides of their head, and they can move them independently. Now they have a visual system very similar to our auditory system. Our vision is three-dimensional. There's no doubt about that. But as those signals come into the optic chiasm, they're combined into a single experience that we recognize as three-dimensional. So you have those two images that overlaps, but those images become one. It is not the same in our audio system. We have stereo, we have left and right. And what's coming over here and what's coming over here is different. And our brains keep them separate, actually. We combine them into a single experience, but we can separate them out. And the brain processes them in a pathway that is very much like stereo. So the advent of, let's say, recording technology, when we were able to replicate the sounds coming off the left ear and the sounds coming into the left ear and into the right ear, and then channel them to headphones or stereo speakers, and people experience the richness of what would have been a live performance in their own home. So moving from mono, which was just a combination of one microphone, one recording, to two recording, ones which represents a slightly different right side and a slightly different left side, and we get stereo. And that word stereo applies, you might remember back when we were talking about vision, it might be, the graphic itself might be in the sensation and perception class, but we used to have these things called stereoscopes. And it was, you probably, have you ever heard of a Viewmaster? There was a toy from my childhood, certainly, and there was a circle of pictures like that. And the pictures opposite each other were created by a stereo camera that had two lenses, and it would take a picture and it would represent the slightly different perceptions of each eye. They would print them on these discs. You'd put them in the disc, you put them in the Viewmaster, and you would look through, and the left eye and right eye were getting slightly different images, and the picture of a flat two-dimensional object would look like it had depth. It had that same slightly different look that we have in real life, and layers behind them, and that is what they called it, stereo vision. But true stereo, talking about the visual experience, and now of course we have surround sound, which takes that to another level. Now, considering we only have two ears, we do not have a surround sound reception system, but we have a sensation system that is so refined that something like surround sound, which places places the sound completely around you as if you were immersed in the action. This is art. When you go to a theater, you're getting surround sound. So when an explosion happens, it feels like it's happening all around you. And the body has the ability to locate where those sounds are. If you ever have the chance to go down to, I think it's still in Kittery. In Kittery, they have the Bose company store. And they have a room that you can go into, and they demonstrate surround sound. And like you'll hear, like you close your eyes, and then like there's a little kid that like walks around you talking, and you can sense their, like you can actually feel like you can locate them in space just by the sound. And it's just the slight changes in those 6 speakers that they have going all around you, that you're then able, through this pathway system, there's no little kid. It's just a modification of what's going to each speaker. And you can actually go, the kid's right there, or a little bit to the right, or I'm pointing actually off camera. He's right there, then he's right there, then he's right over here. And then, oh, something just happened. Oh, I hear a bird over there. Oh, and somebody's calling me from back there. And we have this ability to locate in 3D space sounds coming into 2 little holes that big. And that's the brain. That's the brain kicking in, takes all this information, and the nuances of where things are located. And I will tell you, this is very early. This is very early in life. In fact, they think it probably develops in utero, the ability to locate things in space by sound. I think that it might happen even before we're born, because very, very early on, if you're on one side of the crib or on the other side of the crib, it's pretty rare that you're going to call out the name of your child and they're going to look the other way. Even though they are hearing the rebound of your, when you hear something in a room, particularly like a bathroom that has hard tile and it's a square room and it feels like you're in a little echo chamber. That's why you sing in the shower, because it gives you a nice reverb sound, has a really nice rich tone. We hear music, like we hear things like that all the time. We always hear them in this kind of 3D world, but yet infants will turn correctly to the direction of the voice. So that mechanism is very, very early, different than, let's say, depth perception that comes, a kid's going to walk off a table till they're 2, before they get the idea that, the floor looks further away, therefore it is. It's going to take them a little while to get that. Not two, but there'll be one. There'll be a good year on Earth before they get any of that. So a very intricate system here, and we see the notes, kind of looking at the notes on the staff and music and stuff, and how they're mapped across, just like the visual field is mapped across the occipital lobe. We have music and speech and all of that, the tones of our world mapped across the temporal lobes, the ones at our temples. And so, and I don't mean church, not those kinds of temples, although there's music at those. So, all right. So the first of the that's hearing. The first of the mechanical ones coming in actually has to do with our ears again, and that is our vestibular system. And if you look at this graphic right here, you have the cochlea, but you also have what these things called the semicircular canals. The semicircular canals are fluid-filled, bunch of fibrous tissue in there, making sensations, but they're oriented in 3 different dimensions. Like a Rubik's Cube, they're actually oriented in X, Y, and Z 3D graphic orientation. And the reason for that is one tells you up and down, one tells you left and right, and one tells you forward and back in 3D space. So when you start moving around, it's sending signals that allow you to orient your body in space based primarily on gravity. Gravity is pulling everything down to the center of the earth. And therefore, the ones on top, let's say the cilia are hanging down like this, and I'm standing upright, and I move to this side, and they start swaying because they're trying to stay, I'm going to get this right here. They're trying to stay normal, and I'm going like this, but now relative to the angle, see, I'm not sure if I'm really explaining this right, but that's they're kind of crooked, and our brain says you're leaning over. And that gives us proprioception, a form of perception that the spatial arrangement of our body. Not only like I can put my hand out like this, and I can feel all the muscles in my hand and my arm and whatnot, and know that my hand is like somewhere out there instead of close by, but it also gives us our sense of space and time, our sense of how we are in terms of the Earth's magnetic field, whether we're falling down. So when we lose our balance, it's our vestibular system that's going, whoa, 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 like that, and reaching out and trying to grab something. That's our vestibular system trying to right us, trying to balance us. This is, of course, problematic for our astronauts who escape most of the influence of the Earth's gravity because they're in a constant free fall. They're moving so fast this way that they're not falling. The Earth keeps getting the same distance away. So when they're constantly falling, they're in what they call free fall, and therefore zero gravity. So there's still the influence of gravity, but it's not being felt because they're moving 35,000 miles an hour around the Earth, and they're keeping up with how fast they would be falling. And so therefore they don't sense gravity. So all of them puke. I'm not sure if you know that, but they all go up to space, and it's probably a rite of passage. Your first puke on the International Space Station, you probably save it. I don't know what they do, but they get very sick. They get just, weird senses of up and down, and it takes quite a while to acclimate to that. And so it's one of the challenges, let alone if we went into deep space where you're just floating out there. There's no influence of the Earth at all. And weird things happen to the body. Weird things happen in terms of our muscular tissue that builds up muscle tone because of the weight of our system against our skeletal system that maintains certain muscle tone, so that when people spend extended times in space, they actually lose muscle tissue because their body doesn't have to work so hard to kind of keep itself afloat. And one of the things that we suspect is that if we ever found life on another planet and that planet didn't have a lot of gravity, that those beings would have evolved into very spindly, very light, very breakable, almost like a bird. A bird's bones are hollow. They don't need to, it'd be beings that would be very ethereal. They'd be if there was hardly any gravity, or they developed in space itself. Whereas if you developed somebody and found a species that had a very very concentrated degree of gravity, those individuals would be able to leap tall buildings with a single bound because they would be so big, so strong. That's about as far out as I could get right there. So we have the mechanical senses, including skin sensations. This is touch, pain, pressure, temperature. And we have different neurons for all of those. And one of the labs is going to be about temperature. So we have a cross section of the skin. We have all kinds of different nerve endings and whatnot. And importantly, this is the skin being the largest organ in the body. It's a single organ called skin. And it's very complex in terms of temperature regulation, in terms of information that we take in, has a lot to do with sensations, of course, and sexuality and touch, and even sending emotional signals, not only through touch and warmth, but through the flushing of somebody's face or the movement of tiny skin muscles in our face that makes somebody go like that, and we're like, and the meaning behind that, like somebody looks at you and they go, any sort of like movements and whatnot that are reflected so energetically on the skin, very, very vital part of our experience. So here we have some graphics here to go over about that. And then finally, before I head into the assessments here, the chemical senses, and that is centered around taste and smell. And taste and smell are connected. I didn't spend a lot of time on here. There's great stuff in the book. Don't forget to read the book for all of the cool detail here. But I did want to dispel the myth that different tastes are mapped out throughout the tongue. I was playing with the idea of doing a third lab, but I figured two's enough. But the third lab was going to be sort of, you find a subject and you're going to dip a Q-tip in sugar or something like that and place it on non-sweet areas of their tongue and tell if it could still be sweet. And of course it would be. It'd be able to, we can sense sweetness all over our mouth. So those are just the senses that we have for sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and the last one, which is savory. It's another word for savory, is umami. I'm sure until I designed this class, I never heard of that. And so that was the new one. And our whole mouth is ready for all of those. If something gets in there that's bitter, you know it no matter where it is, and so that piece is a little off. But chemical senses and the physical senses, although physical senses, we can sense some things without them touching us, but chemical senses, a little piece of that needs to be touching us. So I have a very, very sensitive nose. And I don't know if it's because of my hearing, and I just one of the senses that I rely on more. I don't know what it is. A very, very, very sensitive sense of smell. And I have a deep, deep disgust about the smell of cats. It's really not up, and I can smell them everywhere. I go outside, it's like there's a cat peed around here somewhere. I can always pick up on that smell. It could be psychological, I'm not sure. Anyway, I have 4 cats. So I'm obsessive about these litter boxes. Okay, so I can tell. Right now I'm in my office, which we rehabbed the top of our garage, kind of post and beam thing. And the litter boxes are in the big part of the house in a secondary basement, probably about 40 feet away, and I'll tell you, I know when they've gone. I can tell. I'm just aware of it. Now, because I'm teaching this, I also know that means, because this is a chemical sense, that means there's a little tiny microscopic piece of cat poop in my nose. It's really there. It gets into the air, and that's the only way you smell something. If you're smelling steak, that means there's a little bit of steak in your nose. So just remember that the next time you smell something rotten, there's a little bit in there. Or when something smells good, there's a little bit in there. You smell, you're working at a long-term care facility and you get that urine smell sometimes, there's a little bit in there. But that's how our chemical senses work. And they're very, very sensitive. It doesn't take a whole lot of molecules to set these things off. The taste buds that we have, and then the olfactory ones that we have. And this is one of those areas too, if we were going to look, as I had you look at the visual systems, if you love dogs, if you love dogs, look it up. Look up the sensation of smell in dogs. And they not only have, I think, 1,000 times more receptors in their nose. And it's not just because it's a big nose. They just have 1,000 more, thousands of times more receptors. But when a dog is breathing through its nose, you probably notice that the nostrils are flaring when they're sniffing at something. And what that's just the external part of a structure inside of their nose that is channeling. Part of the air is going to the lungs. The other part of the air is going to areas within the nasal cavity that are specific for smell. And it's regulating how much air is going into those areas of the nose, and the rest is going down for them to breathe. And that's why when they're sniffing, they have that kind of rhythmic sort of sensation, and like you can see their nose doing that. And that area, that specific pocket, is just full of neurons to be able to not only smell things, but to locate them in 3D space. So that a dog let's say you have a dog, and this is a real example. My brother had a dog and passed away several years ago, but he was running on the Eastern Promenade in Portland in the big park that's there. So he was running with the dog, and the dog put on the brakes and just yanked the chain. You've probably all been through that, and brought him over to this part of the park and just started digging furiously and got down about this deep and found an old sandwich. So we smell things all the time. I certainly know that I do. And I claim that I have a really good sense of smell, but I won't smell a rotting sandwich at full speed running past and to think the dog immediately. So the way we organize our world visually, because we have some of the best eyes in the animal kingdom, dogs organize their world by smell. So when they rush up to you and smell you, they're learning about you. They're mapping you. They're top to bottom. They're mapping where have you been, who have you been with, what do you know, do you have a treat, all of those things. That's how they organize their world, and that's what makes dogs dogs. So, and taste works the same way. All right, so the pathways in there, and off we go here. So the discussion is a little experiment that I want you to do. I want you to either, maybe it's better to listen to music than to eat something you don't like, but I want you to try listening to music or having a meal that you don't like. And I want you to describe it and share that experience with each other of, like, if I was going to do the taste thing, it would be something like clam chowder. And it's the combination, it's not really, I've had fried clams. They're kind of gross, but I can eat them. But there's something about the sliminess of clam chowder that it's, and the milk taste, and it's warm milk around a slimy booger. That's what it sounds, that's what it's like to me. So if I was going to describe that, I would describe not only the taste, what is it like, kind of get into the negativity, sort of just like a little moment. Things are so bright and cheery in 2020. Take a little bit of time to just get into that negativity a bit, and just like, what do I hate about this? What is gross? Is it the texture, the way it's on my lips or tongue, or the feel of it, or there's a salty flavor I don't like, or there's kind of get your tongue wrapped around that and describe that as best you can with all the different sensations that you have, and smell included, and touch and texture and all that stuff. You can do the same thing with music. Maybe it's a little safer, pick a song that is really, I don't know, something from Willie Nelson. Oh, maybe I offended somebody if you're not a Willie Nelson fan. Or pick music from a, like, say, that's really weird, like very different to Western music, like Chinese string music, or Chinese opera. Listen to Chinese opera, and you're like, oh, never heard anything like that before. But then describe it as best you can. It's kind of a little game on using words to describe things. And describing sensation is very difficult, just like the age-old psychological question, can you please describe the taste of chocolate? Tastes a lot like chocolate. That's about as close as we can get, right? Okay, then the quiz is just a routine looking at hearing and mapping the path through the brain. I didn't talk about it today as much. It's right there in the textbook. It's right there in the notes. So just like I had you describe the visual pathway, I'm having you describe an experience in the auditory pathway. Okay. Any questions about anything I've talked about so far before we switch over to, let's take a look at the 2 labs. Now the first lab, of course, these are online now because I post them Monday. And so the purpose of this is to experience sound through the oscilloscope that's online. So we're going to be looking at irritating and pleasant waveforms, and you're going to be capturing your name. So I put the link here. Now the thing is about this particular application is that it only works in Chrome and Firefox. It might work in Explorer. I don't have a Windows machine, so there's no Explorer for me to test, but I use Chrome for these Chrome things. And so let's see if I still, I do. I still actually have it live here. Let's see if I can get this going. All right. You open it up in Chrome, and it looks like this. Now, there's a little movie that I've included in the instructions that go through this, but I can take these sounds, this little pull down menu, and we all said we like dogs, right? So there's dogs. And if I want to play dog sounds, I press the play button, and it's going to show you what that would look like on the oscilloscope. Look, we captured it. There's the dog sound. And it's a lot of sounds. That's it. Just like the timbre of the saxophone makes it sound like a saxophone. These are notes, whatever that is, A flat. But it's it sounds like a dog. It doesn't sound like a cat. It doesn't sound like a bell. It doesn't sound like, there's things about the way that vibrates through the throat of the dog, so the nasal, through the air, the power, and the immediate release of air, and the stopping, that makes that sudden sound. And you can see those peaks, with the sound, and the roughness of it it's all those overtones that make it sound like a dog. So by pressing the pause button right there, I captured a little piece of that sound right here on the oscilloscope. Now you have all kinds here. So what I'm asking you to do of this list is to identify a sound that you think is nice, pleasant, and then look at another sound that you think is unpleasant and just identify them, and then compare them and look at the waveform and see if you can see anything in the oscillations of the waveform that are sort of, well, things are really jagged, I don't like them, or the jagged looks different on this one than the jagged on that one. Maybe that's why I don't like it. It's all speculation because you're seeing a lot of different, and just describe those two sounds that you pulled from this list. So here's a miter saw. Personally, I like to have that going on while I'm trying to read, but obviously that's very different than oh, that didn't play a lot, did it? Jeez, or a waterfall. Sounds like a miter saw to me. That's the difference. So anyway, going through all those. Now then I want you to do use the microphone, and this is where you need Chrome, because Chrome allows you to use your microphone to actually speak right into this. And if I select mic over here, there's a little button, and now it's responding to my voice. And if I'm talking like this, and then I press the freeze live input right there, I just captured 1 millisecond of my voice, and there's my wavelength, my waveform. But if I was talking like this, play around with it. What if I had a voice like this? High frequency. What if I had a voice like this? What if I had a voice like, I'm not doing this right. Whoa. Here's a real low voice. If anybody walks in and say it's for class, get family members to come in, look at different people's, you have little kids, they speak really high, you got, just play an instrument into it. That's probably pretty cool. And but then what I want you to do is to record not record, but capture a part of your name. So I'd say Mark as part of my name. I could speculate, well, what part of my name is that? And I could just look at taking apart my name. There's an M, which is kind of a rounded, there's a which is a actually ohm tone. And then there's an R, which is a transitory tone with a quick K at the end. So Mark, like that. So what is this? I suspect it might be more a round tone, but let's say if I go, might be the M. I probably captured the M. Didn't capture the A. Then look at that one. So you can see I probably got the M. The M was the one that looked the most like it out of all the letters. And so playing around with that to kind of, and that one I'd like to see the screen capture. So if I said Mark again, like that, get a picture of that screen right there and say, I think this is the M, or the J, the A, the D, the N. You can just, the the kind of phonetic and both Jordan and Jaden, that last sound. So just fooling around with that. And so that's kind of, you do that and then write a little lab report about that. And the next one again has a little video demonstration that I did. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the little movie. So I developed a little animation in order to. Sorry. This is the little movie that I made to explain this particular lab. So let me share that screen. Do you see one big gray movie? So I developed a little animation in order to explain how to do this lab. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we have 3 pans. They can be tinfoil pans like this, or they could be cookie pans, or anything that will be able to hold water. And what you want to do is fill each pan with water, one of them as hot as you can take it. And don't burn yourself or anything like that, but just as hot as your tap water gets. In the other one, you want to put as cold as water as you can get. And in the middle, you have a room temperature, just tepid or warm. So here's our hands. And the way we conduct the experiment is the subject of these, the owner of these hands will take their hands and dip one into the hot and one into the cold. And then they will wait for 20 seconds. During this time, the nerve cells in the hand is acclimating to the hot and cold temperature. And the brain is interpreting, in this case, the right hand is in the hot and the left hand is in the cold. After that 20 seconds, however, ask your subject to move their hands into the room temperature one. And then ask them, which temperature does each hand feel? Now, what they will, the actual neurons are responding to the actual temperature of the room temperature water, but our brain is interpreting it relative to where the hand was. So the hand that was in cold is going to perceive that the room temperature is warm, perhaps even hot. And the hand that was in the hot will perceive it as cool. And be very, very aware, your subject will be very aware of how their hands are feeling the same water in 2 very different temperatures. And it's just a way to demonstrate how the brain interprets relative temperature while the nervous system is really still sending signals of absolute temperature. And that's our experiment. Okay. Did you hear all that? Cool. So it's a pretty straightforward, it's an experiment that I do in class usually, have that all set up and do it yourself, do it to other people. And really, if you have those kind of an extreme temperatures. Use the oscilloscope. Oops. I have loaded this oscilloscope into my Chrome browser. It went on to the next video, the oscilloscope one. If you have them really as hot and as cold and you put them in, it's kind of weird. It's a very, very weird feeling. Like you look at your hands and like visually they should be doing the same temperature and you're like, oh, it's awkward. And it's kind of a cool way to really see that the brain is just registering the change. And relative to where it was, this is a lot colder. So it'll actually feel like cold water and hot water in the same piece, and it's a very, very startling kind of lab. So these are pretty much, the oscilloscope one you could probably do in 10-15 minutes, kind of get that, just kind of experiencing that, playing around with it if you want, and certainly encouraging you to do that. It's a neat little toy to have online, that kind of oscilloscope. And then finding 3 pans and doing this and writing up the labs for each one of those. I'm trying not to make these too complex, pretty straightforward experiences, visceral experiences of what we experience every day in terms of temperature and different sounds and whatnot. And so, any thoughts about what you're left with for this week? right. So Jordan, you're all set?
Okay, sounds good. See you Wednesday.